Welcome to the Up Arrow Podcast with William Harris, featuring top business leaders sharing strategies and resources to get to the next level. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hey everyone, I'm William Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Element and the host of the Up Arrow Podcast, where I feature the best minds in e-commerce to help you scale from 10 million to 100 million and beyond as you up arrow your business and your personal life. Joining me today is Brad Hughes. Brad is the CEO of the Outloud Group, which is a leading U.S. influencer marketing agency. As a proven marketing innovator, Brad and his team at Outloud have worked with hundreds of 8- and 9-figure brands, including Athletic Greens, Policy Genius, SimpliSafe, Fiverr, Chomps, Whirlpool, Keeps, Acorns, NerdWallet, DJI, and many more. I'd probably run out of breath if I kept trying to go with that. A former management consultant and active business builder, Bradley has been featured for his work in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Cheddar, Forbes, and Fox News. Somebody that I've worked with now for years, and I'm excited to finally have on the podcast. Brad, welcome to the show.
Well, it's great to be here. Really appreciate you having me. Wow, that introduction makes me sound way fancier than I really am, but I'm great. I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about the influencer trap, how low quality creators are wrecking your DTC brand, and a lot more about influencer marketing. He's going to level us up here. But before I do that, I wanted to go back a little bit in time to who introduced us first. And I was thinking about this, and you messaged me, and we're just kind of like, I'm pretty sure we agreed it was Tracy Wallace way back when she was the head of content at Big Commerce. So Tracy, thank you very much for making this intro.
Yeah, Tracy rocks. Definitely a super connector. So really appreciate her.
I totally agree. We're going to announce a sponsor, and then we'll dig into the good stuff here. This episode is brought to you by Element. Element is an award-winning advertising agency optimizing e-commerce campaigns around profit. In fact, we've helped 13 of our customers get acquired, with one that sold for nearly $800 million and one that IPO'd. You can learn more on our website at element.com, which is spelled ELUMYNT.com. On to the good stuff. Again, the influencer trap, how low quality creators are wrecking your DTC brand. What's the problem right now with influencer marketing, and why low quality influencers are kind of ruining things?
It's really interesting. It's a really in-depth question here. So what's the problem with influencer marketing, right? So I think the biggest issue that I see starting to hit the industry is creators willing to advocate for almost any brand that's out there. And generally, the creators that are willing to advocate for most any brand out there generally are not the creators that brands are having advocate for them on a second or a third or a fourth time. But a lot of brands will look at creator A and B and say, hey, creator A has similar demographics to creator B, and their price is way lower. So therefore, by putting my money towards creator A, I'm actually getting a deal, right? It's like, well, you're paying less. We can agree on that piece, but value equals benefits minus cost. And unfortunately, I think the same creators who are willing to show for anything, the audience might like their content, might be funny or entertaining, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's trust there. And ultimately, the secret sauce of influencer is a trust that exists between creators and their audience. So it really comes down to like a difference between value and cost a lot of times. And I feel like it's easy to get sucked into a pretty metric that looks good on a spreadsheet, which is a lower cost, per view or per 1,000 views. But that doesn't translate into results. And we're seeing that happen, more so than I'd like these days.
Yeah. I think it was something that you had said on LinkedIn that I liked, which talked about how you're not as much concerned about AI. We'll talk about that a little bit later because I have some thoughts and things that I want to ask you about there. But you talked about how you're more concerned with creators saying yes to almost every brand deal, including competing products. And so it's like, to your point, it's like, well, that even erodes the trust of the creator more and more. So people who are watching their stuff, they're like, okay, well, you said this about this one, this about the completely opposite competitor, and this about the opposite competitor. And so it's like, do you actually have a point of view on this at all, or is this just you collecting money?
Right, exactly. And I mean, look, consumers are smart. Like they recognize that. And if you're advocating for one brand today and another the next, like it just erodes any sort of credibility that you would have had for future partners. And it also just stops the effectiveness of that campaign. And look, most creators get this. Like most creators don't want to do that. Most brands have the expectation of creators not doing it, but there, and this is the minority of creators that are doing this. I want to be clear, but
Totally.
it's increasing, in terms of the number of people who are willing to just take a deal to grab the bag in the near term. And it's like, you can do that. I'm not. Everyone can make their own choice, but it's short term thinking, and that's eating the influencer industry a little bit these days.
Yeah, that reminds me of grabbing the bag. I think I saw recently, this happens in the crypto space a lot where people get rugged, right? Where it's like you get into something, people pull the rug up from under you and, the coin's gone. And I saw the Hatua girl launched a crypto coin or something like that. And, it was like, I don't even remember, hours or something later, it was gone. Like all the liquidity that people put into it was gone and rug pulled out from under them. And to your point, it's like we do see, let's just say people in general right now trying to say, how can I make a quick buck? How can I just go ahead and take this deal without thinking about whether or not it has any benefit to their own brand or the brand that they're representing in that situation. So what's the solution? We've talked a little bit about the problem here. What do we need to do better?
Yeah. Well, I think there's multiple answers to that, right? So from a creator side, I think it's trying to look at, and it's easy to say when you're not the person trying to pay your rent and trying to make ends meet any given month. So I recognize that, hey, it sounds good in theory, but in practice it can be hard for creators when this is their income. But I think it's trying to take a look at the long term and really just ask the question like, hey, is this going to add value to my audience? And if the answer is no, even if you're going to make, a few $1,000s on it, the right move is to not take that partnership. If it's a product that you feel good about and you think adds value to the life of your audience, then by all means, take the partnership, get paid. We want creators to get paid and be 100%. Really successful. So I think just giving it a little extra pause and a little extra thought and being extra discerning from a creator perspective makes a ton of sense. And from a brand perspective, I think the solution is to really work to identify creators who have invested in their audience and who are discerning and who have been effective with brands in the past. And by the way, who are going to cost more, right? 9 times out of 10, and be willing to engage with creators who are really going to move the needle because they care about their endorsement, right? They care. It means something when they say, hey, I'm proud that this video is sponsored by brand X, brand Y, brand Z. And you can see that in the results, right? I mean, we can get into this later, I'm sure, but we have all sorts of data on the creators who've been effective. But in the short version, it's, hey, who are the creators where their audience really cares what they have to say because they're very careful about what they say to their audience. It doesn't mean stylistically they're reserved or like their style could be anything, but they need to really care about what their audience, how their audience is going to get value from what they're sharing from a brand perspective.
So how do you find those people? How do you find somebody that actually cares? You're looking beyond engagement metrics. You're looking beyond, is this just like a manual process? Like, what does this look like?
Yeah. So I mean, look, we're an influencer agency, so we go really deep into data, and I'll talk about that in a second. But if you're trying to be as small and as scrappy and efficient as humanly possible, like the cheat code is look for creators who have brands that have renewed with them a number of times. Right. Because that's a pretty solid proxy that this creator is moving the needle and the audience has they have the trust of their audience. And that's a massive start. For us, as an influencer agency, I mean, we've been around for a very long time, with 17 years in the space, and we have a tremendous amount of data. And so we go really deep on this in terms of being able to identify who are the creators that have historical track record of directing traffic to a website and driving conversions. And for creators, we can see how they've done historically with a number of brands. So we have the data that shows, oh, this creator has consistently been in the 85th and the 90th percentile of all creators for brands in the past. And we don't get that from an API. We from from an Instagram or Facebook or Meta or TikTok or YouTube. No, we get that information just from working with brands over time and having that data. So we don't, we use that data and we leverage that data in a very sophisticated way. But that gives us a massive advantage when we're trying to identify, creators who'd be a good fit. So big believer that, historical performance is the best predictor of future performance. And so we can see that from a data perspective when trying to identify those creators who will be best for a brand.
Yeah. Something you talked about before when we chatted is the difference between brand voice versus brand advocacy. And I saw you said on LinkedIn, creators are great brand advocates and crappy extensions of brand voice. Like, I think this feels intuitive, but break this down for me to make sure that I understand it.
Well, it is intuitive when you pause to think about it. But I tell you what, if you're a brand and you've spent 30 hours a week for the last 2 years working to figure out your brand, and the pentameter with which you speak matters, the verbiage, what phrases you can use, like you can't say free, but you can say no cost or whatever the case may be. Hey, it is so hard to transition from brand voice to brand advocate, because it's like, oh, are there any constraints? Someone asked that. Like, your intuition is going to be immediately to go and to start sharing all the brand voice stuff. But the reality is you need to throw all that shit out the window, right? Sure. So you're successful when the creator can talk in whatever way they want. So my favorite, analogy on this is like, hey, the way I engage with my sisters and my mother, like my family from, growing up, is very different than the way I engage with my wife's family now. And I mean, maybe I shouldn't say very different, but it's different, right? It's like we just have different norms and approaches. And if I were to behave in the exact same way, at the dinner table with both folks, it would just kind of be a little bit off. And so even if you're trying to be light touch, when a brand is telling a creator like, hey, here's what we really need you to do from a brand voice perspective, it just feels off to the audience. And like, I don't know the exact stats. Maybe you do. Maybe you know these, William, but it's like 86% of communication is nonverbal, whatever the exact percentage is. Yep. So it's like a creator can even say all the right things, but if they're not really being like truly themselves, people notice it, and you're going to be less effective. So yeah, I mean, look, you'll always be a creator will be a second-rate brand voice, right? That just inherently, if you're trying to copy and build off of that. But I mean, they're awesome in terms of being able to be themselves, and they have an audience who can't, in a world of ad blockers where we hate to be sold, creators have an audience who really, really wants their recommendation. So let them do the recommendation in a way that they feel fits to their audience, and you're going to see good results from that. But it's just tough to get in that mentality, because you spend so much time building up the brand voice.
We see a difference, right? Like, I'm thinking about even the way that I speak right now. So I grew up in Ohio. Now I live in Minnesota. When I lived in Ohio, the way that I would speak is, I'm from Canton, Ohio. I would just say Canton. We didn't say Canton. We didn't pronounce the T, right? If I go back, though, but in Minnesota, we would say Canton, Ohio, right? That's how we speak. If I go back to see my brothers or something back in Ohio and I start calling it Canton, they're going to be like, what is wrong with you, right? Like, who are you? You're not actually my brother. If I start saying, what's that all about? And start having a little bit of the Minnesota accent comes out, and they actually do hear it. They feel like I have a Minnesota accent now. But the funny part about that is being yourself, to your point. It's like if you give too many restrictions to that ambassador, if you would, the influencer, if it even just slightly sounds off, they pronounce their O a little bit too long, all of a sudden their audience who's used to them behaving, acting, speaking a certain way is completely thrown off, and they can't even focus on your product as much as they're focusing on what's wrong with this. That smells fishy. That's not normal. Something's different here. And I think that's a good reminder that we need to give them that free space. The other thing that I like about this is I'm thinking about, I've got the AirPod Pros on, right? And it looks like you've got something like that on as well, if it's not those exact ones. By allowing the influencers to share the way that they would use the product or the way that they would speak about the product, you can learn so much. The AirPod Pros being an example. I don't know if this is how it happened. Maybe they already thought this from the very time that they created it, but they just launched with these being able to be hearing aids. And maybe that was their plan all along, right? But like maybe also there's a part of me that thinks that people were just like, oh yeah, I use them as like, these hearing aids for people or whatever. It's like, oh, my grandma uses it as hearing aids. And so it's like at some point in time, they go, hey, you know what? We actually should just make this official. What do we need to do that make those officially count as hearing aids or whatever that might be? So you can learn about the product. You can learn about how people are speaking about it, using it. It's a better way overall.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, that's fascinating. I wasn't familiar with the example, but it makes all the sense in the world. Like creators are awesome, like beta testers for
Sure.
brands, because it's like you can see something, right? And it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But creators have something, a higher bar to clear, which is they need to actually understand it well enough to explain it to their audience.
Mm-hmm.
So I love it when a brand has a new product as well. I'm sort of building off what you're saying here, right? It's like you're talking about like a new use case for an existing product. But also like, hey, when you are rolling out a new product and you're not sure how it's going to land or whatever, I mean, running an influencer campaign out of the gates before you really step on the gas in figuring out like how you should go to market can be so amazing, because these are very smart, creative people who have an audience that are going to have to come up with their own way for how to connect with your brand. So it's interesting. Like when I'm working with brands at launch, I love to be like, hey, like do influencer first, small scale, right? Like whatever it is, maybe it's like 50, 100K with influencers, and then revisit, really build out how you want to advocate for the new product at launch. Do that, and then influencers can then come back in and really help to put a lot of scale scale to the launch. But man, they can be so good in terms of being able to identify how you want to go to market and really differentiate yourself with a new product.
I love that idea. Something else you mentioned to me that I liked was the difference between the portfolio view versus a one rat study. What do you mean by portfolio view versus a one rat study?
Yeah, very, very eloquent term here that I use. But yeah, basically a one rat study is something that happens all too often in influencer, right? Where someone will work with one influencer and then say, oh, Instagram didn't work for us, or influencer didn't work for us. Sure. But folks are quick to test out one creator. But the reality is, I mean, we have so much data. And I think that's something that's really unique about us. We have all this great historical data, but at the end of the day, there's still a massive test and learn approach to this. And what we've seen repeatedly is if you run with 10 influencers, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 that do fantastic, 2 or 3 that are pretty much duds, and the rest is going to be somewhere in the middle. And the whole idea is like, look, if you ran with one creator, you did a one rat study, and it's one of the 2 or 3 great performing ones, that's awesome. But guess what? Like now you've set the bar or set the expectation way too high in terms of what you should be able to get from that. And you're going to like budget and plan in ways that are just not indicative of what's going to happen over time. And then of course, like on the downside, it's obvious, like, well, this didn't work, we're not going to keep doing it. It's like, well, you just thrown out an entirely strong either brand or acquisition channel on the basis of a single creator who could have just had a piece of content that didn't do well for reasons that have nothing to do with you. So it's really important in influencer to make sure you're running with enough creators to really have a true test to understand, if the, where the channel's performing with you and learn and evolve it. So, yeah, I think the one rat study is a little bit of a crass term, but it hopefully is memorable to people, because you don't want to just test with one influencer. That's a bad approach.
We see this in advertising all the time as well, where you're creating new creatives and it could take 9, 10, or more to beat whatever your current best performer is. But you're not going to unlock that better performance if you just test 1 or 2 or 3. Or if you do, like you said, maybe you got lucky. But you will see people all the time thinking about, it's like, well, what's this little lever that I have to pull? I got to pull this lever. I got to do this. And it's like, the reality is, if you're working with a really good advertising team, your campaigns are structured and set up exceptionally well. Whatever levers are going to get pulled within the ads accounts after that point in time, it's very small incremental gains. If you're going to make anything that's a little bit more sizable changes, it's going to come from unlocking some type of new creative that is significantly different or better performing than what you have now. You have more opportunity there, but it's going to take some testing. And I do see brands, fatigue on this, where it's like, well, we tested this, and it's like, okay, so 2 ideas. Like, I mean, you got to go a lot deeper into testing than just 2 or 3 different things. So probably similar to the influencer side.
It's very similar. And one of the things that I would recommend to anyone who owns a brand budget, when I say brand, I'm not trying to distinguish between brand and performance. I'm just saying,
Sure.
a budget for your brand is to make sure you're baking in test budgets throughout the year, right? So we do that with our brands within the influencer world. Like, maybe we have a podcast program that's scaled and an Instagram program that's scaled. But so that's great, and we're always going to be optimizing and growing and scaling those where it's efficient to do so. But I mean, influencer world is changing all the time, right? I mean, just hello Clubhouse, goodbye Clubhouse, right? I mean, we've all seen the Vines of the world, but things are changing, and it's like, what even is Instagram? You have Reels, you have Stories, you have static posts and carousels and videos and organic and paid, and this is all just one platform. So, point being is that we always recommend, with our brand partners, like, hey, set aside every quarter $50K to be testing a new approach within the influencer world. Like, I'm not going to sit here, we record this, on the cusp of a new year. Like, I'm not going to tell you what you should be testing out in Q4 right now. I'm not that arrogant to know what's going to make the most sense to do in Q4. Like, we can plot out Q1 and maybe Q2 right now to say, here's what we should be doing for the test. But it's really important, if you're a brand trying to grow and you want to be able to move quickly, to actually plan in advance to be able to move quickly. And I think those lessons apply probably outside of influencer as well. It's like, know you're going to have an innovation budget, whatever you decide to call it, but you got to keep pushing the envelope. You got to keep trying and testing new things.
Yeah. I love that and totally agree. Let's get into some of the data. We talked about using the right data and analytical approach to identify creators. What kind of data should we be looking at when we are looking at this? One of the things you talked to me before was CPM versus performance, and you gave me a nerd alert, which I like because I'm a nerd. So
yeah. All right, let's dive into this. Let's dive. I mean, if for those of you watching on video, I'm even going to pull up a slide here. Perfect. So you can
even better.
You can see. Here's what we do from looking at historical data perspective. So we, again, like I mentioned a little bit earlier here in our conversation. So we've been doing this for 15 years. So we have performance data from all the different creators that we've worked with across all the different brands. And so we mentioned that, the AirPods a little bit earlier. So, I'm obviously going to be willing to pay more from a CPA perspective for someone to buy a pair of AirPods versus an ink pen, right? Sure. So we really can't say any given CPA is good or bad, right? Like, hey, a $5 CPA sounds good on the surface until you realize you're selling, $1 ink pens, and it's actually you're losing money every one you sell. So we don't look at things from a CPA perspective when we're able to predict the future. But what we do look at is, for all the creators that we've run in the past for AirPods, and full disclosure, we do not work with Apple, but like I can see then for all the brands we have worked with, right, which creator was the top performing creator from a performance perspective. That's 100th percentile from a CPA perspective. And the worst performing creator would be the 0 percentile from a CPA perspective. And then, on the screen here, you can see all these different colors. Well, each color represents a different brand. And so we might have run 5 campaigns with a creator for a single brand, so you can see 5 dots in the same color. And so we have historical data that says, oh, wow, look at this creator here, like mostly they're in like the 70th to 90th percentile in terms of how they perform from a CPA perspective. And so this gives us a tremendous, degree of confidence that creator is going to do well here in the future for a brand, provided that we're talking about the same verticals and the characteristics of the audience we're trying to target are very similar. So what we like to say is, hey, we're not going to look at bullshit engagement metrics, likes, shares, comments. Like, there's nothing wrong with looking at those data points, but what we really look at is, well, how is this creator done in terms of driving traffic to a website and driving sales? And what we find is whether you're trying to do a brand campaign or a performance campaign, like that really matters, because their effectiveness in terms of driving traffic and sales is really just a proxy for trust. And trust is, at the end of the day, that is the secret sauce of influencer. It's what the audience, believes from the perspective, believes about what the creator is telling them. And when that's high, people will buy products, and it will also, change their perspectives on the brand and the industry and so forth.
Yeah. I love seeing a chart like this, because on the ad side, we look at things similarly, where you've got your leading and lagging metrics, right? And that's a thing that we've talked about for, generations, whatever. But the CPA being the holy grail, that's ultimately what you want. You're just like, hey, did it actually do from a business stance what we needed it to do? You can't always bank off of that. You have to use some of the other metrics to understand if what you're doing as well, especially, and I'd say on the ad side where this comes into play a lot more would be if we're running campaigns for something that's a much higher AOV product. So the lag from them actually making a purchase from the time that they start seeing the ads can be a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? Some of these higher AOV products. And so you have to turn on the ads and run them for potentially 4 weeks before you know if they're effective or not. And so one of the things you're going to be looking at is these leading metrics, and CPM being one of them. And what's interesting is sometimes CPM is positively correlated with your CPA. And so you can, or inversely, I should say, you can end up having a higher CPM, but a lower CPA. And it ends up being better. So it's not always perfect, but at least within that account, you can start to understand. And to your point, I think that it gives you that opportunity of saying, is this one likely to lead toward it? If you've got a CPM that is too high, where the only way that it would make financial sense is you have to have a conversion rate of 50% on this in order for you to hit the CPA that you need for this product of a pen, this is not the right influencer for you. There's no amount of pens that they can sell because you're not going to get a 50% conversion rate. So let's not even go there.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're spot on, and forgive me because I sort of did all the setup with that in terms of talking about the importance of historical data, but the so what that I know we're really talking about today is the fact that like CPM is not correlated with success from an acquisition perspective. So, I'm sharing this slide here, for those on video, you can see this is thousands of data points, and this is all happens to be on YouTube. We could have done this on other platforms back. Probably should do that. It'd be fascinating to see as well. But I'm very confident I'll show you the same result where, again, I share the methodology of like, hey, what's a creator performance percentile? Short version is best performer for a creator, 100 percentile. Excuse me. Best performing creator for a brand is 100 percentile. Mid is 50 percentile, and worst would be 0 percentile. And you can see that on the y-axis is CPM. And so if you thought that CPM was a good indicator, you should see that the lower you are on the graph, the much higher creator performance would be in terms of having creators drive sales. But that's not true at all. It's, in fact, the correlation is crazy. It's basically exactly flat. Technically, it goes up a tiny, tiny bit, which means the more you're paying from a CPM perspective, the better the creator is likely to perform. And the reason for this is that creators are decentralized media companies. And so if you're a creator, since this graph is YouTube, we'll stick with that. And you do 2 videos a week. So you're doing 8 videos a month. Well, a lot of creators will decide, I don't want all those videos to be sponsored. I'm willing to do 3 sponsored videos a month. Because again, they're trying to look out for their audience, all things. So they have 3 sponsored videos a month. Well, what happens when there's 4 brands that want to work with them? Well, they're going to raise their price, right? And so, and then guess what? Those 4 brands and someone new want to still work with them, right? Well, they're going to keep raising their price until it's not effective in general. Sure. And so a higher CPM in a lot of ways should give you more confidence that this creator is someone that's effective, which is a little counterintuitive, and you have to be careful because certainly there's going to be folks who are going to price themselves too high relative to performance. But in general, yeah, when you're paying for CPM, you're not when you're paying higher, you're generally getting more quality. But what we discovered here is that hey, there's actually no correlation between performance and CPM, and that's where like hey. We did a whole bunch of analysis to say, okay, cool, CPM is not right. So what does actually give you positive correlation between, that you can have confidence in? And again, what we've seen and broken down here, and this gets, I have 2 degrees in engineering, so I'll try not to, go too much into my, I'm a recovering engineer, so I'll try not to go too deep into this. But basically, what we saw is that historical performance is absolutely correlated with using creators who are strong from a CPA perspective or from a performance perspective. So on this top histogram here, you can see there's very little variance, meaning like the highest bar is in close to 0, saying most creators, when you say that you look at the historical data to predict the future, they're pretty close to what the history says they would, right? And so what we predict and what actually happens is pretty good. And then it's sort of a bell curve, and it goes out, and it's pretty rare to have it be really far from the mean, which means it's pretty rare to have the creator not perform as projected for a brand. Whereas if we look at this bottom histogram, you can see it's lower and it's much wider when you're looking at CPM, ability to predict a CPA, and there's you start to get a lot of variation associated with that. So a lot of like in-depth analysis here, trying not to go totally like get that glaze over eyes. But I mean the topic is very important. It's like, hey, what metrics should you be looking at to try to identify creators who are a strong fit? And basically this is disproving CPM as the end all be all, and showing that creators' historical performance with other brands is a much stronger driver of that in terms of predicting success.
And again, it makes sense because it's, evaluating them on how well they did at driving the actual end goal that a customer wanted. And so to your point, historical performance predicts this a lot better. I love seeing the visual difference between these two. That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun, and like it can get so overwhelming for folks at times. But at the end of the day, like we thankfully have evolved from an industry from saying, yeah, this creator looks and feels right for your brand. It's like, no, that's just not enough these days. Like you've got to be able to go deeper in terms of identifying creators who would be good for your brand.
Yeah. I want to talk a couple of examples here because there's some examples that you've shared out online that I really appreciated that are fun. One was, and I think you shared this on LinkedIn, you told a story about selling health products to car enthusiasts. And at first I read that, I'm like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I got to know, like, what's going on in the back of your mind? And you're like, I've got this good idea.
Yeah, it's funny. So yeah, we work with a lot of brands. I think this one happened to be AG1, and one of the, like, you think about any healthcare brand, it's really fascinating, right? Like, you immediately think about the people who are really deep into health. And
Mm-hmm.
that's cool. And that's works, or like technology or, TVs, you think, oh, I got to go to tech channels. There's nothing wrong with that. What's interesting is people who, when you're working with influencers in a very specific vertical, that audience generally knows those topics very well. They've researched them extremely well themselves. And this would just be like another data point, and a valid data point, don't get me wrong, but it's just another data point. And where we like to play is in adjacencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the audience is interested in something, but they're not going to go and do a deep analysis. And if the creator they know, like, and trust makes the recommendation, like, oh shoot, I've been wanting to do that for a while. So in this case, you think about health, right, and wellness. Well, the auto community, in general, like, hey, they're out, they're busy. Maybe they're working a full-time job, and when they're home, they're working on their cars, which takes a lot of time in addition to being, in this case, mostly male. So in addition to being dads, whatever the case may be. And so what's cool is, like, this group would be the first one to say, like, yeah, I'm not as healthy as I could or should be for all these reasons, but sort of they
Mm-hmm.
know that they have a problem, so to speak. And
Mm-hmm.
well, this is where we're able to lead with data, saying, hey, strategic thinking is like, hey, we think this could be, a great opportunity. But then the data says, and these are the creators within that vertical who've performed really, really well. And so we basically moved away from saying, hey, let's start with health and wellness, to saying, let's look to people who know they aren't the healthiest and are always looking for solutions to sort of improve their health, but they're not the ones who are, waking up in the morning and thinking about how they can be healthier. It's just like they
Right.
know that they could be better. So I think thinking a little bit differently can be really powerful. And we saw this with Athletic Greens, and like, they didn't start out saying, hey, we should be in the automotive segment, and that's not what you're going to see in their branding on their homepage or anything like that. But it's very effective for them, because there's a subset of folks who know they have an area they could be better, and then bringing in the data and analytics and execution to be able to make that come to light.
Love it. Love the idea of adjacencies. And it reminds me of something I didn't even remember until just now when we were talking about this. We maybe ran this back in 2018. There's a beauty product that we were working with, and a beauty device, and targeting females. And I want to say it was definitely younger. It was like 18 to 35 is who performed the best for them. And expanded that out to all the different ranges of things and everything. Um, but one of the hypotheses we had when we wanted to scale a little bit more was, well, who are we not targeting? Um, Everybody who is already interested in this. Was back when interest targeting was definitely a much bigger thing on Facebook than it is now.
Sure.
Everybody was targeting. If you're in the beauty space, everybody was targeting the same people, because they're all targeting people who have an interest in these beauty things and whatever. And so we said,
Mm-hmm.
what if we go for people who are interested in bicycles? And it was literally that ridiculous. And it was just like, what's the biggest thing? And we did like an analysis to see like what's the overlap between the two audiences. And there was very, very little overlap. And so part of us was like, are they actually going to want this device at all? Or is this dumb? But we ran it and it ended up performing exceptionally well. And part of that, I think, was just the idea of we were reaching a group of people that weren't normally being reached with these ads, because of the way that a lot of the algorithms were working and the way people were running ads intentionally then. But to your point, it's like, well, what are the adjacencies? Just because they're not currently browsing products like this, so Facebook doesn't know they might be interested in products like this, doesn't mean that they aren't interested in products like this. So how can we make sure that we're
Right.
showing them something that also might be of interest and benefit to them? And like I said, it worked very, very well.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. It is fascinating. I grew up with two older sisters, and so one of my sisters, I remember, quoting Coco Chanel, and I was like, always, you have to do one thing to make yourself feel beautiful, before you go out of the house. And so that makes so much sense. You talk about like riding bikes. Like, yeah, they're not necessarily gonna be interested in like going all out. They're not gonna consume,
Right.
beauty content, but that doesn't mean that they don't, they don't care, just, you don't care about how they look and how they feel in any way, shape, or form. So how can you appeal to that audience where like less is more and one thing is the right number of things to prepare? That's really good thinking. It makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I love that.
I want to shift into AI then a little bit. So earlier you said that you're like, I'm not as concerned about AI as much as I'm concerned about these other things, but AI is an interesting thing that's at least challenging and involving a lot of spaces right now. What are your thoughts about AI within the influencer marketing circles?
Yeah, it is a fascinating topic. I mean, short answer is I think AI is going to help creators just to pour gasoline on the fire in terms of like what they can do and how they can be, creative and, find ways to interact with their audience. I mean, there's plenty of talk about, AI generated creators who obviously not real people, and personas. And look, that's going to happen. I think that's kind of like a bit of a novelty, and there's nothing wrong with folks doing that, in my opinion, as long as they're transparent about it. But I just think like it's again going back to maybe being a dead horse. Like, trust is the secret sauce in influencer marketing. So it's just tough to trust something that's not a human being. It's just an AI created image, pixels on a screen. So I see AI helping the influencer industry in terms of being able to better match creators, getting rid of our own biases. Like, we have media planning teams here. And one of the reasons we love data, which you can talk about, is so that people aren't just like, oh, I like this creator, or that creator, I don't really like their style, right? And like people aren't maybe even going to state it or have a conscious thought, but it enters into our own brains from a bias perspective. And so having our data helps with that. And I think that's where AI is going to be helpful as well, in that you're not limited to what you can see, what William or Bradley can have seen or known, but there's a much broader universe, and be able to tap into it. I think it has an opportunity to be a massive net positive there in terms of being able to identify those creators and interact with them, to be able to figure out what they really want and figure out where the real brand fit it is. I mean, this isn't something that we've done to date, but I mean, you can see where there's an AI that's, having a 10-minute conversation with a creator to try to figure out the exact right angle between the brand and the content of what the creator wants. Right. And so there's ways that you can, I think, use AI to continue to dial things in, but where I've seen it be successful to date is, creator identification, and then streamlining the processes from an agency perspective, but then also, love what it can do in terms of just continue to do more from a creative perspective. But you gotta have the chops first. You gotta have the prompt strategic thinking, and then you gotta have the audience for it to really matter.
We interviewed, I believe it was just last week. I got to think about it because it hasn't gone live yet, but it will be live by the time this one goes live. I think it was last week then that this would have gone live. Jimmy Slagle, and he actually took us through. And he does a lot of stuff in the AI space, but he took us through generating an AI version of yourself that could then be used to create 100 different videos of you saying whatever you want. Where it's like, okay, actually holding the product in the video, creating it into like your own avatar of this, and then from then on, it's like you can give it whatever script you want, and it's going to use you. And it's getting fascinatingly good, right? Like you can still tell a little bit, but a lot of people are starting to struggle to tell the difference. But to your point, I think there's going to be a boom of this, right? Because it's going to be a new novel thing that will allow us to, I mean, you could say it 15 different ways, right? You're just like, great, I can, as the creator, I could record myself doing this once, but then I can have 15 different versions of me doing this. And now it's, which one of my versions ends up doing well? Because maybe, again, we talked about trial and error. Maybe I created one and that one wasn't the one that was going to do well. But rather than me creating 15 manually, I can create 15 of myself, different ideas of me talking about this product. And one of those 15 ends up being the one that does exceptionally well for them. So it'll accelerate that. But I think to your point, there will be this initial wave where that does well. And then there's almost like a follow-up plummet of trust, to your point, because it's like, it will become potentially less trustworthy. It will just feel different, or even people just acknowledging that it was fake, right? It's like, yeah, this was not the real person.
Well, here I would actually might take the other side of that coin here.
Cool. Please.
So here's what I would say is like, if that creator really truly likes that product and believes in that product, that's the key point here in terms of keeping trust.
Sure.
Because if they do, then who cares if you're testing out 15 really cool different ways to communicate that, right? That's just like what's working. Like, to me, the decision that really is going to matter for the audience over time happens before, in this example, before like you're applying all the AI. Because if the creator really does, love the product, and now they're just like presenting in a slightly different way, but it's still like, this is the power of AI, right? If it's still them and their own excitement and they believe in the underlying message, then like I think that could be a net positive for brands being able to continue to test things out and try to figure it out. And then we're doing this for some brands now where like we might run paid ads on YouTube to try to figure out the right verticals that even are like the most effective. And then once we know the verticals, we can take the approach of like working the right creators. So anyways, point is like it could just be a way in to identify what works from a general perspective and go in with more programmatic testing in terms of creator approaches. So it'll be interesting because ultimately like the audience may disagree, with my take, and they might be able to pick up on those nuanced differences. I don't know. And, certain creators will not be okay with you testing out 10 versions of their creative, which isn't actually theirs. So it's going to be interesting.
What about XR, AR, MR, VR, whichever direction we want to go with that? But where I want to go with this is there's a company that I actually invested in called Allegory XR. Will Yin, Michael Maloney, they're kind of running this, and hopefully I'm not sharing anything that I'm not allowed to share. But Will was just showing me this even yesterday. And one of the things that they're doing is you've seen things like character.ai, where people can create these AI characters. Well, they're doing this on a much, much more robust scale, and it is in VR. And so it's like you can FaceTime this character if you want, and like you're talking to them. You've got your Apple Vision Pro on. You're actually in the room communicating with them. This AI character, if you would. Scrap the AI portion of this, though. Where do you think are you seeing much trend in, let's just say, like VR influencer world, where it's like you're in that realm of people being in three-dimensional space with them?
Well, this does get really interesting because I think the gaming community is certainly at the forefront of this movement. And,
they often are.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And so a lot of folks will create, avatars of themselves, or we've seen, plenty of folks where like, they have an anime avatar or whatever, and you can now live stream with being done like in character. And I do see some real, while it's easy to see some of the challenges, and I think Twitter X is obviously front and center, and Reddit, where if you're an anonymous user, it's easy to be like trolling, right? And to just try to stir up a bunch of crap, right? With
totally
fires and daggers and whatever. But the other side of that coin is folks who may not be as comfortable putting themselves out there and not wanting their face to be seen because they're uncomfortable with it. There's like, it creates a very safe space for people to engage as well. And that, I mean, we've engaged with some brands who are, building out easier ways to be able to, create, live streaming and VOD content where the creator it's not their actual face or body, and like you can do a lot of cool things. And so I do think there's an opportunity to express yourself in a way without having like, the repercussions or the judgment of you being out there. So it allows you to sort of like be singular in terms of how you're seen in some ways. And I think that can be positive for folks, and like, gaming can be a very social community as a part of that. So I do think, like, continuing to see AR, broadly, like you said, we could use a lot of different terms there, but I think that's going to continue to find a place, and it's going to be a growing community. I think it's not going to be taking off like, some of us thought maybe the metaverse would a few years ago, but it's not going to immediately turn the page and go mainstream. But I think there's a great opportunity here, and there's going to be some really strong communities that are going to continue to be developed, particularly looking at it through the lens of influencer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's fun, and I'm excited about it. It's obviously something that I invested in because I enjoy the space. I'm curious too about something else that you said on LinkedIn. If we could shift gears into smaller businesses, because we've talked a lot about how you want to go after some of these bigger influencers who are, let's just say, they've already raised their rates because they are effective. But something you talked about was you said obviously high growth brands spending 6 to 7 figures a month on influencers. It makes sense for them, but for some of the smaller brands, you're telling them don't even do it. Where's that threshold? Why tell them not to do it? Like, who should start to think about doing it?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So with influencer marketing, when we think about the right time to do it, it's sort of like when you're ready to stop selling product and start building a brand is a great time. And this isn't to say that influencer marketing is a branding exercise. It's not. But influencer starts to get you into like the zeitgeist and starts to evolve you into really creating a brand. And so part of the opportunity to do that presents itself from a tactical perspective once you've really addressed the low-hanging fruit, which generally is paid search and paid social. And then, of course, like doing as much as you can for organic search, recognizing that there's sort of like an initial amount of SEO you want to do, but then it's always that's like the 80%, but then it's always another 20% that you can go after. It's not a one time thing. But anyways, point is, once you've optimized your paid search and your paid social, like that's really the time that you can put money into influencer, because you're really going to start to see some of the benefits from that. So you're going to see your search is going to start performing better. Your paid social is going to start performing better because of the halo effect of running influencers and having them, really be able to advocate for you. But I don't like to say, and there's some exceptions, right? Like if you're in a land grab. So for instance, the fun little conversation here, right? Like when Viagra went off patent, right? And there's a number of other products, like at the same time, telemedicine was becoming more normalized. Well, suddenly you have a land grab where it's like, okay, how can you get out there, Roman versus Keeps versus him or whomever to try to, get those clients. And it's, we've seen similar things in terms of, FanDuel versus DraftKings or Ancestry versus 23andMe, whomever, like some of those cases where it is a land grab and it really, you need to step on the gas, then you should be using influencers from day one, and big. But most cases, yes, do the fundamentals first in terms of, paid social and paid search, have those in a good spot, and then move to influencer marketing when the time is right.
Yeah.
Just a little counterintuitive, maybe.
Well, no, but I like the way that you've approached that. Let's talk about some other case studies then of influencer campaigns being done well. So we've talked about some of the problems. We've talked about some of the solutions. Let's talk about some of the examples then. And you've worked with a lot of really great brands. I don't know if you want to talk about, talked about AG1 a little bit already. I don't know if there's another part of that you wanted to tell. Otherwise, we could talk about, I know Fiverr and Chomps we talked about would be a couple of good ones.
Yeah. So I think, AG1, very well respected brand. I think they've done a great job. They have one product, very simple, and they're really serious about like trust and credibility with their product. And so they've done just a fantastic job of aligning with really credible people. And that's from an academic perspective. You think about like Andrew Huberman, who's, very, works as a professor at Stanford as well as being an influencer, but then also just from a practical perspective, like, someone like Joe Rogan, who has just a ton of credibility with amongst his audience. So I think it's just understanding what you're trying to accomplish, holistically. And then, yes, you need to look at, the sales, and you need to be a profitable business, but think about like, hey, what is your biggest challenge that you need to solve? And how can influencers help you solve that? And so I think that's one thing that AG1 has done, a really good job with. And Fiverr's an interesting brand.
I'm going to come back to AG1 real quick before we get into Fiverr, because they're one of the ones that I feel like I'm sure this was a thing, but I wasn't aware of it. They really dominated podcast influencer. Like, at least from what I saw, there was just all these podcasts, and every good legitimate podcast I felt like that I was watching was talking about AG1. And it's like, it was like the Diary of a CEO. It's like all of these, like, there were just some really great podcasts. They were like, oh yeah, drink this. And I don't know if he did or not. I think he did. I'm drawing a blank, but there were a lot of these really great podcasts that were talking about it. And I hadn't seen a lot of people doing it as well as AG1 did. Do you think that that's a really good game plan for just about any brand, or is that just a game plan that works for certain types of products?
I think having a strategic angle and working it is going to be effective for most any brand. And it's just really understanding with clarity what that angle is. And like, look, there's some really practical constraints you need to think about too. Like AG1 is a subscription-based product. So if you're selling something that's the same price point as AG1, but it's a one-time purchase, it's a very different ballgame, right? So subscription services do fantastic typically with creators because, the recurring revenue, obviously, but like the best performing creators are going to continue to work with the brand. And so it becomes part of like, you're part of that tribe when you're working, we continue to use that product. And by the way, you continue to see the creator use the product maybe in slightly different ways than you do. And that just creates more momentum and like your desire to kind of tweak how you're using it. So I do think there's something about the AG1 product where it's one product, where it's a subscription, product, a premium product that helps to create a better version of yourself, which is what we all really want. I think there's a lot of things that, came together where their influencer approach, and I certainly include podcast in that, has been, very, very effective in tapping into like the people who are at the, the leading edge of health and wellness, because we're all talking about health and wellness, right? Like, ooh, what is it that you're drinking? Like, literally today, I was texting my cousin about like trying to get him some AG1, totally unrelated to my work with them, and it's like we want to help other people, right? So when it's a health and wellness product, I think that really does matter. So I do think there are some unique characteristics that set up AG1 to be so successful with these types of influencer partnerships. But I think like the core thinking applies to most any brand that's out there, and you just have to kind of think about things a little bit like we were doing. You were talking about the Beauty and the Bikes, and that actually sounds like a fun movie, Beauty and the Bikes. But
yeah,
but yeah, there's just like you gotta find a little bit angle and really think about it a bit rather than just going out there and trying to work with creators who are reaching out to you, or that or your kids know, or your neighbor says is great, whatever the case may be.
Well, I like the word you used for it, which was adjacencies. And I think that's like a really good way of thinking. It's like, what are the things that are just slightly outside of the realm of what you're currently, the obvious stuff, right? It's like, what's adjacent to it? What about, you work with some of the biggest influencers? I know Mark Rober, Cletus McFarland. You work with some really big influencers, and I think that's a lot of fun. They're almost, let's just say, celebrity status, to the point where it's like, I don't remember who was out there on the streets, but they're like, do you know this person? You know this person? And it's like, a lot of times people are like, oh, I know who that is. It's a celebrity, or that's the influencer. And it's like, you ask them about the celebrity, they're like, I don't know if I remember who that is. And so like, there's celebrity status people now. What's it like working with them?
Yeah, it's funny. Like along those lines, Will. Like I think it was like 2018 or something. It's like YouTube famous is just famous now. And
Right.
I was like, it was a good line that I appreciated. That was like a very LA comment. But I mean, working with creators is really interesting because fundamentally they're creators, right? And
Mm.
so like they know how to come up with ideas and connect dots in unique ways. Um, some of them are extremely business minded, and others are not in any way, shape, or form, business minded. And so, like the way you work with them, varies quite a bit. Obviously, there's a ton that have managers or agents. We actually have our own separate talent arm as well. We Outloud Talent. We represent about 35 creators, like certainly the ones that you mentioned earlier, and that number is about to grow quite a bit. But I think one of the things that we know about creators at the end of the day, they're just people.
Hmm.
They're just people. They're trying to figure things out, like you and me, and the way that we can best support them is generally like just make sure we know what are they trying to accomplish, right? Like and make sure we're there to like really lead them and share what our expertise is, but all through the lens of like, well, what does good look like to you in the creator? But honestly, working with creators is a lot of fun. Most of them just work their ass off and they work
Sure.
nonstop, and so just being able to be available to them, and sometimes like you can just be a port in the storm. It's one of the things that we like to say at Out Loud is that's our goal, is to be a port in the storm. And it's like how they just need to vent, they need an idea, whatever the case may be. Like you kind of need to be there to support them psychologically. Because I will say,
Mm.
and maybe I'm on a little tangent here, Will, but I think one of the things that people don't recognize is just the amount of pressure that's on these creators. And like that can really impact their mental health. Because you think about it,
Hmm.
you and me, we have a good day at work or a bad day at work. It's not being beamed out to the entire internet like it is a creator when it's like, oh, this
Sure.
post did awesome, you're on top of the world, and then the next one really underperformed, and you just are questioning everything, like if you have
Mm.
any skills or ability or relevance. So that's true on a micro, and then on a macro, like what's the amount of time that a creator is usually front and center. Think of them like, pro athletes. You're really at your peak for what, maybe 3, 4, 5 years,
Hmm.
if you're like most. And then how do you handle the downside of your career as a creator
Mm.
when you're
Sure.
getting 85% of the views that you were before, 70%. You still might be crushing it and making money, but man, that can be taxing on creators. And so you have to really be aware of everything that they're dealing with and how they're approaching things as well. And I will say that's definitely an art, and it's really about like building the relationships. So you can have the honest conversation. It's like, listen, I know we were getting 25K last year, and those same brands are not back this year because it's not being as effective now, right?
Hmm.
And to
Hmm.
that's tough because you're sort of like saying that you're worth less now. And when you're in any profession, you put so much into it. I'm sure you can relate to this. Like you tie so much of your self
Totally.
identity into your work, and that's dangerous. And I think that's on steroids for creators. So
Sure.
it's awesome working with creators, but you really have to know and understand them, I think, to to have the best long term partnerships, because it's hard. It's hard for creators.
Yeah. That said, any fun stories? Or is there anybody that you're like, this is the most interesting one that I've worked with? It's like they're a character and who you see on screen is exactly them, or it's like they're completely not what I expected. Like anything that you can share?
Oh my gosh. So one of the creators we represent is a guy by the name of Lindy Beige, and he's based in England. And his name is Lloyd, right? And Nicholas Lloyd, but he just goes by Lloyd. And he doesn't have a cell phone. And it's imagine the amount of fun that's taken away from not exactly knowing the moment and precise location that someone's going to pick you up and meet you at the airport, right? And like he's the most fascinating guy ever because he thinks so differently, and he'd be the first one to say, he's always pushing up against the latest of latest deadlines to be able to get something out. And it's because he cares so much and he wants to do his entire video in one shot. Like not many creators do that anymore. But like the uniqueness of someone that's a ballroom, dance instructor, but a historian and wants to go into painstaking detail about things. And he's one of the ones that at times can cause, headaches for us, but it's all like headaches out of love because he, if he's working with a VPN, he's like, well, how is this working? Well, what does that mean by that? Well, what if I lose that password? He asks like really hard questions. And because of that, his audience really, trusts him, but he just goes in such, long rambling rants, which I love, about him. So he's probably like the most unique creator that I get the opportunity to work with on an ongoing basis. And just think the world of him.
That's fun. How do you work with somebody that doesn't have a cell phone? How are you just like, does he check email maybe or whatever? It's like, I'm picturing you trying to be like, hey, we've got this gig for you. You're sending a carrier pigeon over to him.
Yeah, it doesn't work as well when he's traveling. I'll say that. Sure. But yeah, it's email. And then just I think knowing the space, like we know how to work with Lloyd, and we know how to set expectations with brands as well about like how it's all gonna play out. And that's the thing. It's like, yeah, we talk about this data and the data really matters, but also like I can tell a brand, listen, this creator is awesome. Their audience really trusts them. They just, I can't tell you that they're actually going to go live this month. They will go live. They're going to do it, but like they're just very bad at sticking to a timeline. So if we can be flexible, you're going to be happy with the results. But I can't, but if you have a strict budget and you know it needs to go live this month, like this is not the creator for you. So it's being able to also, share the softer elements of running a campaign. That's so fun. But yeah, another creator I would just have to give a shout out for is a guy by the name of Matt Carricker. So he has Matt Carricker channel and Demolition Ranch, which is a massive gun channel, and he's a veterinarian, family guy, like the least political guy ever. Definitely not like a rah Second Amendment rights guy or anything like that. And like when you go out with him, like you get stopped all the time. And it's kind of that part's like kind of fun, but what the best part is like he's 100% the same off camera as he is on camera, and so that to me is like what the creators that I tend to appreciate the most are the ones that's just who they are. They're just being 100% themselves. Whereas there's plenty of creators that can be successful, like being characters, or different versions of themselves, whatever the case may be. But I personally just love working with creators who are the same on camera as off, because sometimes you have this like cool easygoing creators on on camera, but then they can be very different off camera. But yeah, Matt's awesome. One of the many good creators where is the same on and off camera.
Well, it's fun getting to know the creators. I want to shift in getting to know you. And who is Brad Who's? I think it's always fun to get the personal side of the people that are on here as well. I understand that you are the youngest of 3, 2 older sisters, and that has shaped a lot of who you are. In what ways has that shaped you?
Yeah, well, first, my sisters, it taught me that life isn't always fair. They could, get me with their nails, and you couldn't do anything. They're 4 and 8 years older than me, so they could beat me up for a while. And then I got bigger and stronger, but then I wasn't allowed to do anything, back to them. And I learned that at a very young age that, from my father, life isn't always fair. So they could kind of get me for years. I could never get back to them. But no, in all seriousness, like my sisters have been it helped me shape so many of my tastes and like round out like the alpha maleness that can afflict so many of us. I think about like the high school hockey, locker room, and how how different it was being around sisters, because then, they don't care about any of that stuff, but they, taught me a lot about, how to do a better job of listening, how to do a better job about caring about different interests and making sure you're really thinking things, through and trying to, tap different, different approaches and things. And then, taste in music and then writing, one of the cool things about having an older sister, I remember I thought I was, doing just fine writing. And then I happened to like read a report that my sister did. And I was like, seemed like magic. And I was like, oh,
Sure.
you can write like this, like I never even, it just like opened my eyes open. But no, I definitely, having two older siblings and two older sisters was like super helpful in terms of just allowing me to be a much more well-rounded human. And to this day, like, it's just great. Like they really always looked out for me, and like just knowing, I mean, for all of us as humans, we need that personal attachment, and like knowing you're loved is huge. And I was just very fortunate. You have two awesome parents, but then also two older sisters to do that. And I think like, every kid needs to be loved and deserves to be loved. And to have that, in spades was something that even to this day, like I'm just so grateful and appreciative for, and trying to pay, as much back to now being a dad, pay as much back as humanly possible. So yeah.
I love that you shared that you were able to learn a lot of like those relationship skills from having your sisters too, right? Like listening and how to change up your message and stuff like that. The oldest of three boys. And so I learned absolutely none of that as a kid. We jokingly would even say that it's like, for Christmas, it got to the point where it's like, we wouldn't even give each other gifts anymore. It was just like, hey, here's $20 kind of thing. And then it shifted from that. And it was more like, hey, here's the shirt you bought me, just by the way. It's like we just spent our own money on ourselves. It was just very, very different relationship skills that I've had to learn as an adult instead.
I can appreciate that. Yeah, I can. Like, yeah, just like some things that you don't even realize that you're learning them. But then I see like some of my buddies, and I'm like, you can't do that. You can't say that. And it's like, no, you got to be able to like listen for a minute, or think about why it's not okay to eat that, eat that food. I don't know. I'm blanking on good examples, but man, I'm very fortunate for that. And it means I didn't get beat up much, once I got to a certain age. That was good.
Sure. Yeah. Something else that you said that I really appreciated is that you grew up, your dad was in the Navy. And so you have like this do-say ratio that you kind of live by. What is the do-say ratio?
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to my good friend Jake Siegel on this. He actually had it. I think he says say-do ratio, but I'm a big believer in the do-say ratio. So basically, a higher number is better. So look, basically, like what I was taught is you do what you say you'll do when you'll say you'll do it. And what I've learned is that that's not common. And people like, a lot of folks become really comfortable if I say like, oh yeah, I'll get that to you on Tuesday, with, on Wednesday saying, oh, I'm going to get that to you tomorrow. And I was like, well, wait a second. Like you said you'd do it on Tuesday. Like you gave me your word. Right. And so, look, life happens, but I think you've got to make sure you're communicating when that happens. And like that needs to be the exception, not the norm. And so to me, like the do-say ratio is like, hey, are you respecting the people that you're interacting with? And most importantly, sometimes it's, are you respecting yourself? Like, hey, I'm going to go to the gym 4 times this week. Well, you said you would do it. Do you actually do it? Right. And like most of us, if we pause, myself included, like we know what we really need, but are you willing to have that conversation with yourself when the music's off and no one's around to say, hey, this is what I'm going to commit to. This is what I'm going to commit to myself that I'm going to do. And like, you gotta put the oxygen mask on yourself sometimes first.
That's
and so,
huge. Yeah. Well, that actually reminds me of, I think it was, don't quote me, I think it was Jordan Peterson that I heard that from. Something along the lines of, a lot of times the reason why people are frustrated or stressed out is because they don't actually trust themselves, because they've failed themselves over and over and over and over again, where it's like they've said, I'm going to do this, and they don't follow through with it. And so it's like, how do we start those little micro things? And one of the ideas that I think it was him who gave was like, make your bed in the morning. It's very, very simple. It's not that hard. Just do something small that you could say. It's like, I said I was going to make my bed and I made my bed. It took 5 minutes, right? And then it's like, you can build upon that. And it's like all of those little wins will allow you to start trusting yourself, which is a really important thing.
It is. It's so important. And I mean, it's no accident the military teaches you to do that, by the way, right? You have to make your bed in the morning and you actually get the benefit of it that night. I don't know anyone who prefers getting into a messy bed versus a made bed, right? And so at the end of the day, that's a much better feeling when you're opening up the sheets and getting into a bed versus an unkept bed. And so you start to see this like, oh, I put in the work and I get the reward as well. And it's great. And the most meaningful things, there's years of separation between putting in the work and reaping the rewards, right? And so it's hardest when you have to trust the process and continue to put in the work and continue to get better without seeing those results as well. And so, I think I don't remember who this was from. I want to say it was a guy by the name of Eric Thomas, but I'm not sure. And it was like, don't be a goal grinder. It was like, don't want to work out until you lose 10 pounds. Want to work out and to work out every day because it's going to keep making you better. And I was like, that's really interesting because I do believe in setting goals, but also what's more powerful than goals is habits, right? And habits start to become who you are. And so when that's what you do, that's who you are, that's tough now you're talking about changing self-identity, which is much harder. So for me, I go to the gym, every morning. And I think that's so important. And it's just part of who I am. And now that's my favorite time of the day. Cause it's clear mind, usually listen to a podcast, my mind can wander in 15 different ways, but it's something that it was hard at first. Is now it's I don't want to miss that. It's my favorite time of the day. And I think that's pretty powerful. So
there were 3 other things I wanted to chat about, but we're out of time. So I'm going to layer it down to 1. The 3 other things were your 2-year-old daughter, landing a client on a ski lift at Vail, college football, Michigan State, which, I'm from Ohio, so we'll skip all of that. But the one that I really want to get into is your 2-year-old daughter and jumping around.
Yeah. So I'm sure I'm not unique in having a young toddler who likes to have that little mini trampoline and jump on it all the time. And so I don't remember who it was, but my wife or I started to say, jump everybody, jump everybody, jump. And so she started to love it and wanted to repeat it. And so then we played the song for her. And then speaking of college football, shout out to Wisconsin Badgers and, jump around House of Pain. So next thing you know, we put in, we started to play the clean version of that for our 2-year-old and she was all excited and she would say new jump song. She played the new jump song and then that evolved into crisscross jump. And so now my daughter, it's not unusual for her to request crisscross being played as a 2-year-old, which is awesome. And so, Spotify end of year song that was played the most in our household was indeed Jump Everybody. So my 2-year-old's, just really impacting and elevating our taste of music in our house for sure.
Taking me back on all of those songs. Crisscross will make you wanna jump. As long as she's not starting to wear her pants backwards, or I guess at 2, that's almost the default anyways. And it's you got to see if you can get her to start wearing it forwards.
You know what she did do? She picked up in that song, they say, believe that. I don't know. She's the first time she heard it. She said, believe that. And so she'll say, believe that around all the time. And so it's funny the things that you get picked up on. So you better believe that, Will.
Yep. Brad, it's been absolutely amazing talking to you, learning from you, learning about you. If people wanted to work with you or follow you, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
Yeah, I think probably the best thing is just go to our website, outloudgroup.com. Certainly you're welcome to, follow me, connect with me on on LinkedIn as well. Always happy to have conversations around strategy. I've told plenty of folks, hey, I don't think you're ready for an agency yet. We might tell that to you. So if you're not sure, that's okay. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to chat and help people to grow and get that arrow going up into the right.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for sharing your time, knowledge, and wisdom with us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I had a great time. I appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to the Up Arrow podcast with William Harris. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.